The evening was quiet, broken only by the steady rhythm of Eleanor's hands as she folded a stack of clean towels in the kitchen. At 68, her joints ached with every movement, yet she carried out the task with the same patience she had shown her whole life. The faint hum of conversation drifted from the next room. Their voices were low, almost conspiratorial, but Eleanor had lived long enough to recognize the sound of words not meant for her ears. "You need to say something," Karen's voice snapped, tight with frustration. David's reply was softer, reluctant. "She's your mother. She can't live with us forever. She doesn't help. She just takes up space." Karen hissed back quickly. "Exactly. She's nothing but dead weight." The word pierced Eleanor's heart. Her hands stilled, a towel slipping silently onto the counter. For a moment, she could not breathe. She pressed her lips together, the sting of their words heavier than the arthritis in her bones. She stepped into the doorway, her voice quiet but steady. "I heard you." Karen flinched, her eyes wide, caught in the act. David turned toward his mother, guilt flashing across his face. "Mom, that's not what she meant," he stammered. Eleanor's gaze held firm. "It is. You just didn't think I'd be listening." No one spoke. The silence swelled, thick and suffocating. Eleanor turned away, returned to the kitchen, and folded the last towel with trembling hands. Her heart beat steadily, slower, but stronger than they knew. She had endured much in her life, but some words clung like shadows. And tonight, those words had carved themselves deep. The dining room was warm with the scent of homemade stew, a recipe Eleanor had cooked for decades. Her hands, gnarled from arthritis, trembled slightly as she carried the steaming bowl to the table. She wanted everything to be perfect. Perhaps, she thought, a good meal would soften the tension that lingered in the air since last night. But as she lowered the bowl, her fingers betrayed her. The weight shifted, the rim slipped, and hot broth spilled across the tablecloth, splattering onto Karen's lap. "Seriously?" Karen hissed, jerking back in disgust. "I'm so sorry," Eleanor murmured quickly, reaching for a napkin. Her hand shook as she stretched it across the table, desperate to clean the mess. Before she could touch the cloth, Karen's palm struck her hand away. Then, with a flash of anger, struck her face. The sharp sting wasn't what cut deepest. It was the silence that followed. David sat frozen, his fork still in his hand. He didn't shout. He didn't demand an explanation. He didn't even look at Eleanor. Instead, his eyes dropped to his plate as if nothing had happened at all. Eleanor straightened slowly, her cheek burning. For a heartbeat, she searched her son's face for the boy he once was, the boy who used to make her birthday cards out of pasta and glue. But all she saw was a man who chose silence over his own mother. She withdrew her hand, folded it into her lap, and swallowed the ache rising in her throat. In that moment, Eleanor understood something she had never wanted to believe. Her son would not defend her, not even against this. The sound of the front door opening cut through the heavy silence of the dining room. Eleanor lifted her eyes just as a familiar voice called softly, "Mom?" Rachel stood in the doorway, suitcase still in hand, her face pale from the long drive. She had not been home in over a year, but the exhaustion in her eyes told Eleanor more than words ever could. Divorce papers had been signed only days before. Her voice on the phone had been cracked with grief. Eleanor hadn't expected her to come so soon, yet here she was, her youngest child, carrying her own broken pieces. Rachel's gaze fell to the table. She saw the spilled soup, the reddened cheek of her mother, the shame written in Eleanor's posture. Then her eyes turned toward Karen. Something inside her snapped. Without hesitation, Rachel's hand struck across the table. The sound of the slap echoed through the room. Karen staggered back, stunned. "If you ever touch my mother again," Rachel said, her voice like steel, "I will break both your hands." David shot to his feet, anger flaring. "What the hell, Rachel? You don't live here. You don't get to come in and act like some hero." Rachel turned to him slowly, her jaw tight. "You let your wife hit Mom. You let her call her a burden. And you stood there like a coward. She's not helping us. David snapped back, his voice rising. She just takes up space, just like you. A parasite who ran home the moment life got hard. The words cut through the air, cruel and heavy. Rachel flinched, as if struck herself, but her eyes never wavered. She reached for her mother's hand, squeezing it firmly, anchoring them both. Eleanor, trembling but resolute, stepped between them. Her voice was quiet, but it silenced the room. Enough. For the first time in years, strength rang clear in her words. She looked at Rachel, her eyes soft. You are not useless. Then she turned to David, her gaze hard. And you are no longer my son. The room went still. David opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came. Eleanor guided Rachel gently toward her chair by the window. Though her heart was heavy, for the first time in a long while, she felt hope stir within her chest. The room still quivered with the echo of raised voices. Rachel stood close to her mother, her fingers laced tightly with Eleanor's, as if holding her upright. David's face was flushed with anger, his fists clenching and unclenching at his sides. Karen hovered near him, her expression a mix of outrage and disbelief. You're both the same, David spat, his voice trembling. Useless. Dead weight. Parasites. The words hung in the air like poison. For a moment, Eleanor's breath caught in her chest. She had spent her entire life giving, to this boy she once rocked to sleep, to the family she had sacrificed everything for. And now, the child she had raised with love had chosen cruelty instead of compassion. Rachel inhaled sharply, ready to shout back, but Eleanor lifted her hand, silencing her daughter. Slowly, painfully, she rose from her chair. Her movements were deliberate, each step measured as she crossed the small space that separated her from her son. Enough, she said, her voice steady, though her heart thundered inside her chest. David froze, startled by the force behind the single word. Eleanor's eyes, weary yet unwavering, locked on his. Rachel is not useless, she declared firmly. And neither am I. I have carried this family on my shoulders, through widowhood, through hardship, through every sacrifice you will never understand. Her voice grew sharper. And now, after everything, you dare to call us useless? David's mouth opened, but no sound emerged. His face paled. Eleanor straightened her back, the weight of years no longer bending her. Then listen carefully, David. You are no longer my son. The words cut through the air with the finality of a door slamming shut. Rachel gasped softly, her grip tightening on her mother's hand. Karen's lips parted in shock, but she said nothing. For the first time in her life, Eleanor did not cower, did not shrink into silence. She stood tall, not as a guest in their home, but as a woman who remembered her worth. David looked at her, his face twisting with something between regret and rage. But Eleanor no longer searched for the boy she had raised. That boy was gone. In his place stood a man who had chosen silence when she needed him most. And so she turned away, guiding Rachel toward her chair by the window. Outside, the sky was streaked with fading light, the world carrying on as if nothing had changed. But inside Eleanor's heart, everything had. Long after the shouting had faded, Eleanor sat alone by the window, her thoughts drifting backward through the years. The house around her, its polished walls, its bright rooms filled with toys and laughter, was not built by chance. It was built on her sacrifices. She remembered the day David had come to her, excitement written across his face. Karen stood beside him, her hand resting on her swelling belly. There's this perfect house, Mom, David had said, his eyes shining. Good schools. A yard. Room for everyone. But we're short on the down payment. Eleanor hadn't hesitated. She thought of the small brick house she had called her own for decades, the place where David had grown up, where his childish scrawls were still carved into the pantry beam. That house had carried her through widowhood, through long nights of mending clothes after graveyard shifts, through winters when the furnace groaned but never gave out. It wasn't grand, but it was hers. How much do you need? She asked simply. Within a week, the money was transferred. She didn't ask to have her name on the deed. She didn't want them to feel burdened. This is for the babies, she told herself. For their future. They'll understand what it means. But when the papers were signed and the moving vans emptied, Eleanor did not take a room with sunlight or space. Instead, she was given the guest room squeezed between the laundry and the garage. A mattress on the floor. No window. No place to hang the photographs she had carried from her old home. Still, she told herself it was enough. She was close to her grandchildren. She could help. She could belong. She rocked babies through fevers, walked them to school, cooked their dinners, washed their clothes, and paid bills no one knew about. She gave and gave, quietly and without complaint, believing that love given freely would one day be returned. But as she sat now, staring at the walls of the house she had paid for, Eleanor felt the truth settle heavy in her chest. She had traded her home, her independence, her very comfort, for a place in a family that no longer wanted her. The house she thought was built with love had become a cage. Eleanor's mind often wandered to the quiet hours, the moments no one else seemed to notice. The mornings when she rose before the sun to prepare school lunches, slipping notes into lunchboxes with little drawings to make the children smile. The afternoons spent waiting in carpool lines, humming to herself while her knees ached from sitting too long. The nights when fevers raged, when nightmares came, when small hands clutched hers in the dark, she was always there. She had been more than a grandmother. She had been a second mother, a constant presence. Yet no one ever said thank you. When the bills began to pile on the kitchen counter, Eleanor had quietly taken one into her hands. A red-stamped final notice glared back at her. The mortgage. David brushed it off with a quick explanation. Karen had left work early, money was tight. Things would even out. Eleanor nodded, but that night she sat awake at her desk, arthritis stiffening her fingers as she arranged the payment from her own account. Month after month, she paid half the mortgage, never telling them. She didn't want to embarrass her son. She told herself it was love. Her sacrifices were endless. Groceries she bought with her pension. Clothes she mended with sore eyes and tired hands. Dinner she cooked, her own plate often left untouched so the children could have more. Laundry baskets hauled, toys picked up, backpacks repaired. And when Karen's sharp voice cut her down, calling her recipes outdated, rolling her eyes at old stories, sighing at Eleanor's presence, Eleanor simply smiled and tried harder. She baked Karen's favorite bread, though it went uneaten. She folded Karen's clothes, though they were tossed aside. She sewed buttons back onto blouses, though Karen never noticed. And when she did speak to Eleanor, it was only to remind her, "You're lucky we have space for you. Not every family does." Through it all, David said nothing. He turned away when she sought his eyes, silent when she most needed him. Eleanor had given her life in pieces, every hour, every coin, every ounce of love she could muster, until there was almost nothing left. Yet in this house, her labor was invisible, her presence resented. Love had asked for sacrifice, and she had given it freely. But what she received in return was silence. It did not happen all at once. It came slowly, in small, cutting ways that chipped at Eleanor's spirit day after day. At first, it was the little things. Karen's sharp sighs when Eleanor offered to help in the kitchen, the roll of her eyes when Eleanor told the children family stories. "Don't confuse them with your old-fashioned ideas," Karen would say, her tone dismissive. Then came the complaints, slipped in like barbs hidden in casual conversation. "She doesn't pay rent, but she eats. She uses the water, the electricity. It adds up," Eleanor overheard one afternoon. Another day, Karen handed her a grocery list and added, almost carelessly, "Might be nice if you started buying your own food. You do eat a lot of yogurt." The words stung, not for their bluntness, but for their pettiness. Eleanor's pension had quietly covered countless bills they never knew about, yet here she was, reduced to a line item on Karen's mental budget. Worse still were the reminders of her age, slipped in like poisoned honey. The night she accidentally burned the rice, Karen stepped into the kitchen, sniffed the air, and laughed. "Well, I guess you really are getting old." Eleanor forced a smile, though the remark pressed on her chest like a weight. She turned her gaze to David, silently pleading for him to say something, anything. But his eyes slid away, as if avoiding hers would erase the cruelty of the moment. And so the cuts kept coming. The cold remarks. The looks that said she was in the way. The silence from the son she had once believed would always stand by her. Individually, the wounds were small, almost dismissible. But together, they carved deep into her, leaving her with the quiet ache of being unwanted in the very home she had given them. Every night, as she sat alone in her small, windowless room, Eleanor felt the walls close in tighter. She had traded everything for this place, her home, her independence, her comfort. And now, piece by piece, she was being carved down to nothing. A death not by one cruel act, but by 1,000 small cuts. The night of the slap did not fade quickly from Eleanor's memory. Even as the sting on her cheek softened, the silence in David's eyes lingered like a bruise on her heart. She had endured years of small humiliations, but that moment, the sharp crack of Karen's hand, the absence of her son's voice, was the final thread snapping. For days, she moved through the house like a ghost, performing her duties with the same quiet precision, but inside her mind a decision began to take shape. It was not loud or dramatic. It was steady, resolute. She had given enough. On a Tuesday morning, after the family left for work and school, Eleanor sat at the small desk in her room. Her arthritic fingers trembled slightly as she dialed the number written on the envelope she had once hidden from them. The mortgage company. Harper Residence. How can I help you today? The woman on the other end asked kindly. This is Eleanor Harper, she said softly, her voice calm but unyielding. I need to make a change to the account. The woman confirmed her identity, then read aloud the details. Yes, Mrs. Harper. It looks like you've been making partial payments on the mortgage since July and a large lump sum last December. That's correct, Eleanor replied. But I'd like to stop today. There was a pause. Stop. Yes, Eleanor said firmly. From now on, all payments, all notices, and all responsibility must go directly to the homeowners, David and Karen Harper. The woman hesitated, her tone shifting into something careful, almost pitying. Of course, I can finalize that request today. Would you like written confirmation? Yes, Eleanor answered. Please email it to me. 2 hours later, the confirmation arrived. Eleanor printed the letter, folded it neatly, and slid it into an envelope. For the first time in years, she felt her shoulders lighten. That evening, she cooked dinner, lentil soup, David's favorite once upon a time. She baked bread, set the table, and laid the envelope beside the salt shaker. She moved through the motions quietly, almost tenderly, but inside her chest, a storm had cleared. She would no longer carry their burdens. She had decided. And the weight, for once, was not hers to bear. The table was set carefully, as if nothing had changed. A steaming pot of lentil soup rested at the center, its scent filling the dining room with a warmth that felt almost like nostalgia. Freshly baked bread cooled on a wooden board, its crust golden. Eleanor moved quietly between the kitchen and the table, her step steady though her heart pounded beneath her ribs. When David and Karen returned home, she greeted them with the same calm smile she had always worn. Karen slipped off her shoes and dropped them carelessly by the door. David was still glued to his phone, muttering half-words into it before finally setting it down. They sat, bowls filled, bread passed. The clinking of cutlery and the ticking of the wall clock were the only sounds in the room. Eleanor watched them eat, her own spoon untouched. She waited until the bowls were nearly empty before reaching for the envelope she had placed neatly beside the salt shaker. "What's that?" Karen asked without looking up, her tone more dismissive than curious. Eleanor wiped her hands on her napkin and set the envelope between them. "That," she said evenly, "is the last mortgage payment I will ever make." Karen blinked, stunned. "Excuse me? I called the bank this morning," Eleanor continued. "From now on, every notice, every payment, every responsibility belongs to you, because this is your house, not mine." The room fell silent. David's spoon clattered against his bowl. His face flushed red as he looked at his mother for the first time all evening. "I've paid this house for 3 years," Eleanor went on, her voice calm but firm. "The down payment, half the mortgage, groceries, repairs. I've cooked your meals, raised your children, and stayed quiet while you rolled your eyes, while you called me names." She looked at Karen, her gaze sharp. "You said I was dead weight. Well, I'm removing the weight." David's lips parted as if to speak, but Eleanor was already rising. From beside her chair, she lifted a small suitcase upright, its wheels clicking softly against the floor. "The givers are done giving," she said. Karen shot to her feet, her voice rising. "You can't just leave. What about the kids? You can't just drop this on us." "I can," Eleanor replied, her voice steady. "And I am." David looked like a boy again, guilt etched across his face. "Mom, please. Let's just talk." Eleanor shook her head slowly. "You let her slap me. You let her call me names. And when your sister defended me, you called her trash. You stood behind her every time, even when you knew she was wrong." His eyes brimmed with tears, but no words came. "I'll be gone in the morning," Eleanor said simply. "You'll get the keys back. And you can do whatever you like with the guest room." Her suitcase waited by her side, small but sufficient. For the first time in years, Eleanor felt the stirrings of freedom. Dinner was over, and so was her silence. The house was silent when Eleanor rose before dawn. She moved through the kitchen one last time, her fingers brushing the edges of the counter where she had kneaded dough countless mornings. The kettle hissed as she brewed a single cup of coffee, the aroma wrapping around her like a farewell. She placed her house key on the counter beside the mug. No note, no goodbye. Only the quiet click of finality. Her suitcase waited by the door, small and worn but packed with everything she truly needed. A few sweaters, her birth certificate, her pension papers, and a photo album filled with fading memories. On top lay her late husband's watch, the only piece of him she had never let go. She stepped outside, the morning air cool against her skin. The sky was still dark, streaked with the faintest hint of pale light. The wheels of her suitcase rattled softly against the pavement as she walked down the street toward the bus stop. A neighbor watering his lawn lifted a hand in greeting, unaware that she was disappearing for good. Eleanor smiled faintly and waved back, her heart steady. At the station, the bus idled, its vinyl seats cracked with age. She climbed aboard, settling by the window as the city she had lived in for decades blurred into the distance. She didn't cry. There was nothing left to grieve. As the bus rolled through sleepy towns and quiet hills, Eleanor breathed more freely than she had in years. She nibbled on saltine crackers from her pocket, scribbled a few words into her journal, and let the passing fields stretch out before her. Florida was still hours away, but Rachel was there, waiting, perhaps unknowingly, for her mother. The thought was enough. The further the bus carried her, the lighter Eleanor felt. For the first time in a long while, she was not moving toward someone else's need, but toward her own freedom. The bus hissed to a halt under the bright Florida sun. Eleanor stepped down onto the pavement, her small suitcase bumping behind her like a faithful companion. The air was heavy with heat and the distant cry of cicadas, so different from the muted silence she had left behind. Rachel's apartment was only a short walk from the station. The building was modest, chipped railings, cracked sidewalks, paint weathered by years of sun and storms. Yet as Eleanor climbed the stairs, her heart beat faster, not with dread but with anticipation. When the door finally opened, Rachel stood there, her breath catching in her throat. Her daughter looked thinner than Eleanor remembered, her eyes ringed with fatigue, her lips trembling as though she had been holding herself together for far too long. "Mom," Rachel whispered, her voice breaking. For a moment, they only stared at each other. Then Rachel dropped her keys and suitcase and rushed forward. Eleanor opened her arms, and her daughter collapsed into them, clutching her tightly as if afraid she might vanish. Neither spoke at first. Words weren't needed. Years of pain, Rachel's bruises hidden beneath makeup, Eleanor's humiliation behind closed doors. melted into the fierce embrace of two women who had survived. When Rachel finally pulled back, her eyes glistened. "You're really here." "I'm here," Eleanor said softly, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. "And I'm not going anywhere." Rachel's apartment was small, just one bedroom, second-hand furniture, and an old air conditioner that rattled noisily in the corner. But to Eleanor, it felt more like home than the house she had just left behind. There was no contempt here, no silence laced with cruelty, only the warmth of her daughter's presence. As they sat at the tiny kitchen table, Rachel poured 2 cups of tea, her hands still trembling. She slid one toward Eleanor and whispered, "We'll start over, you and me." Eleanor reached across the table and took her hand. "Yes," she said, her voice steady. "We'll start again. Together." And in that quiet moment, mother and daughter began the first day of their new life, scarred, but unbroken, ready to rebuild. The rain tapped gently against the window of Rachel's apartment, a steady rhythm that filled the silence between them. Eleanor sat on the worn couch, her hands folded neatly in her lap, while Rachel curled at the far end, her arms wrapped around herself as though bracing for a blow that might still come. For days, Eleanor had noticed the way her daughter moved, quiet, cautious, always glancing at the door as if expecting someone to barge through. She locked every bolt at night, double-checked the windows, and jumped when her phone buzzed. Eleanor had said nothing, waiting, giving her space. She knew the weight of unspoken words and how long it took for them to find their way out. That night, Rachel finally spoke. Her voice was soft, trembling, like a child confessing a secret too heavy to carry alone. "He called me garbage," she whispered, staring at the floor. "Not just once. All the time. If I forgot to take out the trash, if dinner was late, if I spoke too softly or too loudly. Even when I breathed wrong, he reminded me that I was nothing." Eleanor's throat tightened, but she stayed silent, letting the words come. Rachel's fingers twisted in her lap, knuckles white. "Last month, he took my car keys. Said I didn't deserve to leave. That if I walked out, no one would take me back. That even my own mother wouldn't want me." At that, her eyes finally lifted, raw with hurt. Was he right? Eleanor's heart broke at the question. She moved closer, taking Rachel's cold, trembling hands into her own. "No," she said firmly, her voice shaking only with love. "He was wrong. He was always wrong." Rachel's lips quivered, but before she could answer, her composure shattered. Sobs tore from her chest as she collapsed into her mother's arms. Eleanor held her tightly, stroking her hair just as she had when Rachel was a child afraid of thunder. "You're safe now," Eleanor whispered again and again, her voice steady as an oath. "I didn't protect you then, but I will now. I promise." Rachel wept until exhaustion quieted her, her breathing evening out against Eleanor's shoulder. And as Eleanor held her daughter, she made a silent vow. This time, she would not stay silent. This time, she would stand between her child and the darkness. Life in the little apartment began quietly. At first, it felt like survival. 2 women sharing a space filled with second-hand furniture and mismatched dishes. But slowly, it grew into something more. It became theirs. Eleanor found comfort in the kitchen. She baked small batches of oatmeal cookies, banana bread, and soft rolls, filling the rooms with the warm scent of cinnamon and butter. Rachel, who had once abandoned her hobbies under the weight of her marriage, began crafting jewelry again. She worked at the small table near the window, her hands steady as she threaded beads, polished stones, and shaped wire into delicate patterns. One evening, Rachel showed her mother a necklace she had just finished, simple, with a sea blue stone set in silver. "I used to make these in college," she said softly, almost shyly. "I thought maybe I could try selling them again." Eleanor's eyes lit up. "Then we'll do it together," she said. And so they began. Rachel listed the jewelry online, while Eleanor carefully packaged each order, tying boxes with string and slipping handwritten notes inside. Soon, neighbors stopped by asking for cookies, and then for jewelry too. Orders trickled in, small, steady, enough to keep them busy. They named their little venture Mother and Daughter Goods. The name felt right, a quiet testament to the bond that had carried them through so much pain. Their days found rhythm. Mornings began with tea and laughter, afternoons with work spread across the kitchen table, evenings with simple meals eaten side by side. At night, Eleanor wrote in her journal while Rachel sketched designs for new pieces. It wasn't wealth they found, it was something richer. Independence. Belonging. Hope. And as the weeks passed, the apartment no longer felt like a hiding place. It felt like the beginning of a home. The days in Florida slipped into a gentle rhythm, each one softer than the last. The little apartment, once only a refuge, began to glow with the warmth of something greater, renewal. In the mornings, Eleanor brewed strong tea, while sunlight spilled across the kitchen floor. Rachel often joined her barefoot, humming tunelessly as she flipped through sketchbooks filled with new designs. Sometimes Eleanor baked just for the smell of it, cinnamon bread, butter rolls, oatmeal cookies, letting the fragrance curl through the rooms like a reminder that love could still rise, warm and tangible, from her hands. Rachel, too, rediscovered pieces of herself she had long abandoned. She bought a set of paints and brushes, and soon the apartment walls bore little bursts of color: seashells, sunrises, wildflowers. "It feels good to make something beautiful," she admitted one evening, dabbing glue across a canvas while her mother kneaded dough beside her. On weekends, they walked together by the sea. The tide lapped at their ankles, cool and forgiving, as gulls wheeled overhead. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes they didn't. The silence between them was no longer heavy but easy, like a shared blanket of peace. And slowly, laughter returned. The kind of laughter that bubbled up unexpectedly when Eleanor sprinkled too much flour and left a white handprint on her daughter's cheek, or when Rachel painted a seashell so poorly that both of them dissolved into giggles. Their laughter filled the apartment, chasing away the shadows that once lingered in the corners of their lives. Each evening, when they sat at their small kitchen table with simple meals, rice, vegetables, sometimes just a single grilled fish, they no longer felt the weight of what they had lost. Instead, they savored what they had rebuilt. A home where love was not conditional, where kindness was not rationed, where both of them could breathe freely. It wasn't a grand life, but it was real. And in its simplicity, it was beautiful. The Florida afternoon was quiet, heavy with the scent of lemon tea and the faint rattle of the old air conditioner. Eleanor sat by the window, trimming dead leaves from a basil plant, while Rachel stirred a pot of soup in the kitchen, humming under her breath. It was an ordinary day, the kind Eleanor had come to treasure. The phone rang, its sharp tone cutting through the calm. The number was familiar, an area code she hadn't seen in months. Her hand hesitated over the receiver. Against her better judgment, she answered. "Mom." The voice was shaky, older somehow, worn thin by worry. It was David. Eleanor's chest tightened, but her reply was steady. "I'm here." There was a pause, then his words tumbled out in a rush. "I'm sorry. I should have stopped her. I should have defended you. I thought we had time. I thought things would get better, but, Mom, we're losing the house. The bank, there's foreclosure papers. We don't know what to do." His voice cracked. "Please. We need your help." Eleanor closed her eyes. She could almost see him sitting at the same table where she had once placed the envelope that ended her silence. She could almost hear Karen's voice, sharp and scornful, calling her dead weight. She remembered the sting of the slap, and the even sharper sting of David's silence. Her voice was calm, almost gentle. "Do you remember the day Karen slapped me at the table?" David's breath caught. "Yes." "Do you remember what you did?" she asked quietly. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. Finally, Eleanor answered for him. "You did nothing." On the other end of the line, a soft sob escaped her son. "Mom, please. We're drowning. Just please come back. We'll make space for you again." Eleanor glanced around the little apartment, the scent of soup in the air, Rachel humming softly, the basil plant thriving in its small pot. Home. A true home. "I was a burden to you then," she said, her voice steady as stone. But I'm not anymore. Then what do I tell the kids? David whispered. Eleanor smiled sadly, though he couldn't see it. Tell them their grandmother is doing just fine. And maybe one day, when they're grown, they'll understand what you didn't. Before he could reply, she ended the call. No goodbye. No promises. Only peace. The letter arrived on a warm afternoon, tucked among bills and catalogs. The envelope was uneven, the handwriting shaky, each letter pressed hard into the paper as if carved with determination. Eleanor's heart stirred when she saw the name scrawled across the front, Grandma. She carried it to the kitchen table and opened it carefully, her hands trembling not from age, but from anticipation. Inside was a sheet of lined notebook paper, the edges crumpled, the pencil marks faint in places. Dear Grandma, it began in Lily's uneven script. I hope you are happy. I miss you. I miss the smell of your cookies. I miss your hugs. I told Mommy and Daddy that. Mommy cried. Daddy went outside. I hope I see you again. Love, Lily. At the bottom was a drawing. 2 stick figures holding hands in front of a house, both smiling wide. Eleanor's stick figure had a crown of curls, and beneath it Lily had written, too large for the line, Grandma. Eleanor pressed the paper to her chest, tears welling in her eyes. She had not cried when she walked away from the house, nor when David had begged for help. But this child's voice reaching across the silence, broke something tender inside her. That evening, when the apartment was still and Rachel had gone to bed, Eleanor sat at the small table with pen and paper. She began slowly, her handwriting neat though her hand shook a little. Dear Lily, she wrote. I miss you too. My cookies still smell the same, and sometimes I bake cinnamon bread just for the joy of it. I planted basil and lavender on the balcony, and they grow strong in the sunshine. The beach here is soft and quiet, and the seagulls are greedy little birds who always want my toast. She paused, her eyes misting, then continued. You are never far from my heart. I think of your laughter, your hugs, the way your eyes light up when you tell me stories. I carry all of that with me every day. Eleanor didn't mention the house, or David, or Karen. That weight was not Lily's to carry. Instead, she slipped a small pressed violet into the envelope, a flower she had picked on one of her seaside walks with Rachel. With all my love, Grandma. The next morning, she placed the letter gently into the mailbox. As it disappeared, Eleanor felt a lightness settle over her. She could not be in Lily's home, but she could still be in her heart. And sometimes that was enough. The years that followed unfolded like pages in a book Eleanor had never thought she'd get to write. What began as quiet survival in a small apartment blossomed into something more vibrant, a life lived fully. She and Rachel traveled when they could, sometimes with little more than a paper map and a thermos of tea. They wandered through sleepy coastal towns, danced under gas station lights when a favorite song came crackling through the radio, and once flew across the country just to watch lavender fields bloom. They didn't chase wealth or status. They collected laughter, memories, and the kind of joy that left them breathless. At home, their days were filled with simple pleasures. Rachel painted seashells and sold them at seaside markets. Eleanor baked cinnamon rolls that neighbors lined up to buy, her recipes passed from one kitchen to another like treasured secrets. Evenings often ended on the porch, the two of them sipping tea as the sun melted into the horizon, their conversations drifting between dreams and memories. Laughter became a constant presence, the sound of healing stitched into every corner of their lives. Rachel laughed again without fear, her voice free. Eleanor's own laughter, once silenced by shame, grew louder, richer, filling rooms that had once only known her quiet labor. And in those moments of stillness, Eleanor reflected on the words that had once haunted her, dead weight. She saw them now for what they were, a cruel lie, spoken in ignorance. She had never been a burden. She was the strength that had carried generations, the love that had stitched families together, the quiet resilience that had kept a home alive when everything else threatened to collapse. She was not dead weight. She was survival. She was grace. She was a woman who had chosen to walk away from silence and step into her own light. Sitting beside her daughter one evening, the sea breeze brushing against her cheeks, Eleanor whispered a truth she finally believed. I was never a burden. I was the blessing. Rachel leaned her head against her mother's shoulder, smiling through tears. Together, they watched the waves roll in, no longer carrying the weight of the past, but the peace of a future they had claimed for themselves. And in that quiet, Eleanor knew. She had chosen freedom, she had chosen life, and at last, she had chosen peace. This story is not just about walking away, it's about reclaiming dignity, love, and peace. To every woman who has ever been called a burden, to every mother and grandmother who has ever been silenced, remember this: you are not dead weight. You are strength, memory, and survival. And sometimes the most powerful choice you can make is to walk away from what diminishes you and step boldly into the life you still deserve.